And now to our top story, the corruption trial of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu ongoing right now. A second hearing at the Jerusalem District Court. Earlier, the premier and other defendants in the three cases were there. Netanyahu choosing not to respond verbally to indictment charges against him, instead confirming the written defense submitted by his lawyers and then proceeding to exit the courthouse after being there for around 20 minutes. The rest of the hearing will discuss the timetable for presenting evidence in the trial and whether or not Netanyahu will be forced to attend. The panel of judges will also decide if the process will begin before or after the upcoming March election, which may have implications for the entire political establishment. It's the second hearing Netanyahu is attending in his trial. In the May 2020 hearing, hundreds of supporters of the premier showed up outside the courthouse, but this time around, Netanyahu calling on the public not to gather for the occasion due to the coronavirus situation, although many protesters, detractors of Netanyahu, did show up at the courthouse today. And with us is our senior correspondent, Owen Alterman, outside the courthouse. Owen, give us a wrap-up of what happened inside the courthouse in the 20 minutes that Netanyahu was there.
Well, right, Alec, a quick recap, and you covered some of the main points. First of all, Netanyahu answered the charges and made the plea in his own words and his own name, by himself, not through his lawyers. We hadn't known if that was going to happen. We thought maybe his lawyers would confirm that plea for him. Again, he had already submitted the plea in writing, so there was no suspense about what he was going to plead, but he did do it in his own voice, which is interesting. Second, he did stay a bit longer than he needed to. Technically, he could probably have been able to leave after confirming that plea before the discussion about these pretrial motions and the objections raised by his lawyers. He stayed a little bit longer, but as you mentioned, Alec, after about 20 minutes, got permission from the judge, got a slip of paper from his lawyers, and then decided to leave. And he has already left the courthouse and gone onward. He has a scheduled meeting later today with the visiting Prime Minister of Greece. So he's on to other things. And of course, tonight, the coronavirus cabinet will meet to discuss, again, whether to open and how to open the education system. As for the rest of the hearing, it's moving on to the second part of the hearing, which is discussion of these objections by Netanyahu's lawyers. And the main one, did the Attorney General need to request in writing, to authorize in writing, the conducting of the investigations, or of some of them? Netanyahu's lawyers say that he did need to, and he did not do so. Again, there's been some pushback from the three-judge panel. We have not yet heard from the prosecution on that point. A lot of legal scholars think that this is a long shot, that Netanyahu probably will not win on this objection, but it is being heard, and we are expecting that process to take a few hours. Then, of course, Alec, getting to maybe the climax of the day, as you mentioned, the question of the timetable and whether witnesses will or will not be testifying before the March 23rd elections. We'll wait and see how that develops over the course of the day.
Yes, and just very briefly, Owen, what do you really expect, in a nutshell, to be the major story coming out of the courthouse today?
Well, first of all, the fact that Netanyahu came here in person, that he didn't give a speech as he did last time. He wasn't defiant. He, in some ways, was more respectful, if you will, of the court and its process. He came, he showed up, and just spoke with his lawyers and then left. And, of course, this is the timetable, the question of when these witnesses are going to testify, and then that follow-on question, which we talked about earlier, would that have an impact on the election or not? At least the first part of it, whether they'll testify, we may be wiser by the end of the day, or some say by the end of tomorrow.
All right, Owen Alterman, our senior correspondent outside the courthouse, will get back to you the rest of the day for more updates about what's going to happen over there.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu appeared in court just a short time ago, where he entered a not guilty plea to charges of bribery, fraud and breach of trust. Mr. Netanyahu is charged in 3 separate corruption cases. He has described his indictments as a stitch-up, calling it an effort by Israel's liberal and media elites to topple him from power. CNN's Sam Kiley is outside the courthouse. He joins me now live. Good to see you, Sam. So what is the latest on Netanyahu's corruption trial, and where's all this going?
Well, he pleaded guilty in that he agreed with an earlier written statement from his legal team some weeks back, denying any and all roles in 3 different sets of corruption allegations, 3 different cases labelled 1,000, 2,000 and 4,000. He spent about 20 minutes in court in the building behind me, the Jerusalem District Court, Rosemary, where he was seen to be taking notes, wearing a mask for most of it, on a yellow legal pad before leaving, where he is pretty much in about 10 minutes' time going to be chairing a meeting of the cabinet and other members of his government administration to deal with the COVID pandemic, which is something of a focus, obviously, for Israel and the Israeli Prime Minister, because he also faces legal jeopardy, political jeopardy in the form of the March 23 elections, and a good deal of criticism, in part, certainly from demonstrators on the ground here, for his, what they would say, failure to deal with the COVID pandemic. That said, Israel is actually leading the world in terms of the vaccination campaign. He was hoping to be able to capitalize on the success of that and see this court case get ignored, or at least postponed until after the March 23rd elections, because of course there's great potential political damage to be done to him in terms of seeing a rollout of prosecution witnesses against him, many of them part of the prosecution's argument that he was part of a series of corrupt deals in exchange of a political preference in some media, in exchange for preferential legislation, which led in the case of one set of allegations to as the prosecution is going to allege undue profits of some $280 million equivalent in an Israeli company here. So this is a highly problematic time for the Israeli Prime Minister as he goes into this 6-week election campaign.
All right, many thanks to Sam Kiley bringing us the latest live from Jerusalem. Appreciate it.